The first thing is that the media is a pre-baked cake. They already know what they want to cover and what they would prefer not to cover. They are biased. That is something that we all understand about legacy media and traditional news networks. They have an agenda. You cannot change their agenda. You cannot present them, just some kind of random story related to your activist cause and expect them to pick it up. You have to think about, what are they covering and how can I fit my story into what they are already more likely to cover.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Vaping Unplugged podcast. My name is Lika, and I will be your host for today. And let me introduce you to our very special guest, Stephen Kent, who is a writer, media commentator, and public speaking coach. And he's public relations specialist at the Consumer Choice Center. Thank you so much for being with us today, Stephen, for taking your time. We're going to be talking about media engagement. Obviously, you are an expert in that field. So thank you for taking your time for us and our audience. And welcome to our podcast. I'm going to jump in directly to ask you, this has been an ongoing thing for us, an issue that we've tried to address and tackle, misinformation, how the vaping mainstream media portrays actually vaping and tobacco harm reduction. So basically want to cover that topic with you as well. So what are your thoughts on that? What have you noticed so far? And maybe are there any noticeable biases as well that you've seen about harm reduction in general?
Well, the media's bias is by and large in favor of fear. So, whatever they know makes their audience feel afraid or anxious about the future, that is going to be what they are biased towards and how they're going to first approach covering stories. That's, I think, just rule number one. It's not so much about vaping or marijuana or nicotine pouches. It's about newness and it's about things that make their audience afraid. Well, who are the mainstream established media's audience? They are people typically age 45 and up. You could maybe even bump that even higher and say 55 and up are the core audience for legacy media networks that drive most of the negative and fearful coverage of new things, even less harmful things than cigarettes, which older generations, by and large, smoked. So that's how they mainly structure their narrative. And I think that it's incumbent on activists and advocates of certain products in any industry, because I'm not a vaping expert by any means, but it's on those people to kind of understand what those biases are and try to do a little bit of myth busting along the way. That's how you begin.
Definitely. And we've tried ourselves as well. The myth busting, our campaign was addressing exactly that issue because we've seen a lot of very common misconceptions that exist all around the world. It's not a country specific or region specific. It's just that surprising to see that there are so many exist in most of the countries. So
Yes.
what to say. So you mentioned actually quite an important point as well. What role do you think vaping advocates play in this shaping media coverage, and what advice would you give them as well?
Well, vaping advocates, just like any advocate, you are up against a situation in which your audience, and we're talking about sort of mainstream media, the newspapers, the radio programs, the legacy television networks. You have to present yourself and your case to that audience and simply not be the person that the legacy media said you were. So, what that means is they're doing months and months of fear mongering and scare stories and talking about, vapers or abolitionists or police reform advocates, talking about them as fringe or scary or strange people, right? People that don't fit the norm of their audience. And then when you come on to that network and have an opportunity to share your story and offer a counter narrative, you can't bust every single myth in 8 minutes or 4 minutes in the time of those segments. What you have to do is slightly undermine the credibility of the media that lied about you. And you can do that by simply presenting yourself in a good way, being buttoned up, making a good first impression. If the media is saying that vapors and, people who enjoy, nicotine pouches and all these kinds of things, like that they're bros or people who don't have children or, I don't know, degenerates, right? Like that's kind of part of that narrative. Then you present a person when you go on television who is just like the friends of the people who are watching. So then the person enjoying that news broadcast and getting to meet you goes, I think the media has been lying to me about who these people are. They told me that these people were strange or on the fringe, but this person looks just like my cousin who I love. This person is a lot like my daughter. This person looks like somebody who I could work with. When you do that, you undermine the media's bigger narrative. You undermine trust that they are always telling you the truth. And that is good. That is to your credit. And you should continue to always try to do that by making a good first impression, presenting yourself well, and showing up for the occasion. I'm not a big fan of when vapors try to make a point by smoking on television. This is a thing that I see all the time, that vapors or enjoyers of traditional cigarettes, they love to make a point by taking puffs on air. It's just, it's not good. Please don't do that. You're trying to present yourself as completely mainstream, and not out of the norm. And that kind of behavior usually comes across as antisocial.
Yeah, so basically, it's on us to set the tone about ourselves, and that's for sure.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more about that. And you mentioned about this, like appearing professional and, just undermining that maybe someone's lying about us in
Hmm.
general. But let's also talk about strategies how to get more coverage. Do you have some advice there? Because it's all good if you get a chance to talk about those myths and bust some of those myths, but another thing is how to approach to get more coverage on social media or writing articles or just anything regarding that.
Yeah. So I think there are two things that are true at the same time, and they might come across as contradictions. The first thing is that the media is a pre-baked cake. They already know what they want to cover and what they would prefer not to cover. They are biased. That is something that we all understand about legacy media and traditional news networks. They have an agenda. You cannot change their agenda. You cannot present them, just some kind of random story related to your activist cause and expect them to pick it up. You have to think about, what are they covering and how can I fit my story into what they are already more likely to cover. That's going to depend on kind of what issues that you're talking about. So maybe one example, it's not the perfect example, but maybe one example is that the legacy media in Great Britain is more likely to cover the disparate impacts of health outcomes on white populations versus people of color. Health equity. It's a big hot topic in center left, a little bit more liberal media. And so if they want to cover stories about racial bias and variation of outcomes within the healthcare sector, then you can come to them with a story that leads with that and has to do with vaping or has to do with smoking, and you could talk about, the way that switching over from combustible cigarettes to vapes or smokeless products, how that improves public health. This is my impression, not something that I'm looking at as fact, but my understanding is that Black and brown populations, particularly in Great Britain, are more likely to be combustible cigarette smokers coming from the Middle East, Northern Africa, places like that, and not vape versus smoking old school cigarettes, which are much worse for their health and shown to be far more harmful than vaping. And so you'd want to ask that question, why? And why is the government here not doing more to promote switching so that they can improve the health equity gap? You don't have to approve of the topic of equity. You don't have to approve of the liberal bias. You just have to acknowledge that it exists and work within it, and not try to change it, because you can't do that. So that's the first thing, a little bit long-winded. But the second thing is, you can create stories, and this is something that everybody should consider how to do that. A story is not coming to the media and saying, hello, I have a perspective on vaping and why it is good and more people should switch. That's not a story. A story is 5 or 6 young people have taped themselves to the side of a building and they will not leave until until the government acknowledges X, Y, or Z about whatever issue. You see this with environmental activists. They go and glue themselves to the runway of an airport or something like that.
Be creative.
Yeah, I do not support defacing classic art for your activist cause. But this is creating a story. They're going, the media will not cover our issue unless we do something horribly offensive to the population, like throw soup on a painting or glue ourselves to a runway. So that's like an example of what they're doing there. They are saying, you won't listen to us, so we're going to do something that forces a conversation on this issue. You can be much less dramatic than that. You can just stage a protest outside of a building. You can gather people for a rally. You can set up a shop that is in the middle of a downtown area that introduces people to different products, and then invite media to come and see it for themselves. That's a story that they can cover. So try to think about ways that you can create events or things worthy of a journalist coming out and taking some pictures and writing about it.
For sure. No, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, and as I said, taking more creative ways to think about those as well. Thank you for that. Actually, it's something to keep in mind. And we've been also trying to. That's another thing of approaching how you create a story, right? We've been trying to encourage people to share their own personal success stories. Let's call them success
Mhm.
stories, or personal journeys, right? So like how, if there are like health benefits they've seen throughout their lives, or how if they've switched from
Mhm.
traditional tobacco cigarettes and now they're vaping and how it helped, and so on. Because I think one other aspect of sharing that story would be that everyone is like, it's a lot of attention to it, right? Because we're not just waiting for, oh, there's a like this organization or someone else XY, they're gonna do it for us. Because I think it's on all of us as well, if we want it to be heard and the issue to be understood, right?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
100%. Yeah, you got to try to play within the ballpark that they have built and
Mm-hmm.
understand that. And if you don't want to play, you're going to have to build something else. You're going to have to build a pirate ship to go around the gatekeepers,
Mm-hmm.
to mix a bunch of metaphors there. And that's what people are doing in new media when they create podcasts or YouTube shows and all the likes. They're basically saying, I don't want to play by your rules. I'm going to go do something else. But the thing about traditional legacy media is that it has that credibility factor, and that credibility factor is valuable. It is highly sought after, and you should try to get into that space when appropriate.
Of course, and it's definitely important, and definitely might be a case of reaching a different demographic rather than you done before, right? So if you want to broaden an audience, I think makes sense to cover all of everything you can cover, basically. So
Mm.
um, that's quite important, and couldn't agree with you more there. And also, I wanted to ask you about this. Another thing we've been also encouraging people, and I would say it's important that more op-eds are written,
Mm.
right? Any topics in general, but vaping as well. So any advice there, any suggestions for our listeners? I think most of them would be very interested if I'm just passionate vapor.
Hmm.
Vapor myself. I'm an activist, but might not be part of. I don't have my own vape shop or any
Yeah,
other way engaged in that regards. But I do want to, contribute something. Any advice on that? And also would be very important to hear from you if you have advice how to get it more published, how to
sure.
get media attention for that as well. Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind is that rules are different and norms are different in any given country. So the way that your media works in the country of Georgia might be very different from the way the media works in England or the U.S. So that being said, I will never forget several years ago there was a very horrific shooting in the state of South Carolina. A guy went into a historically black church in South Carolina and opened fired. And media coverage in South Carolina began obviously picking up this story. And there was a huge push in the state to have Confederate or Southern flags from the Civil War removed from state grounds across South Carolina. And so the media is looking for people to talk about it, to respond and offer their opinions on this new debate. Should these flags come down if they are associated with this evil act that this guy did? And I had a couple clients and they wanted to sound off and write about this. And that was worthwhile to do. But they first have to answer a question. What is my connection to this story? One of those clients grew up in Virginia. Another one of those clients grew up and lived in Florida, but he has opinions about the South Carolina story. Well, those aren't good enough. You don't have a connection to this story besides your opinions. But I had another client who grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. He grew up around those flags, seeing them on state house grounds. And there's a connection there. That's the first thing you have to be able to do is establish a connection between you and the story. If you can't do that, you're not the person to write it, and you should have somebody else do it. You have to look in your activist network and go, all right, who here actually has a story worth telling that's related to this news angle, and we're going to put that person's name on this story and present their story. So connection, a reason for being. There has to be a reason why you're submitting an op-ed. Op-eds can make a big difference, but if the entire country is discussing Me Too, sexual harassment, or tax rates, and that's the national discussion right now, and then you try to come in out of left field and say but I want to talk about vaping. No, that's probably not going to work. It's not going to be of interest to the editor because they're going to go, no, why would anybody click on this story when everybody's clicking on stories right now about the battle in Parliament over taxes? Those are the kind of things you have to be realistic about. So a news hook, a reason for being, a connection to the story, and then you got to dive in and write it. And this is where personal stories and anecdotes matter a lot. All you have to do to be able to write that story is say, I am a person who vapes. I used to smoke combustible cigarettes. My health was horrible. I couldn't run. I couldn't go out with my kids and do certain things without stepping out for a cigarette. I missed my child's basketball game one time because I was just hankering for a cigarette and had to step out, and I missed him shoot the winning shot of that game, and it broke my heart, and I'll never forget what that's like. And by the way, like vaping, I don't have to do that anymore. That has solved my problem, and by the way, my health is better, and I can also go do more stuff with my family. That's a great story. That's a personal connection. That makes for a really powerful op-ed. You lead with that, you close with that, and in the middle of the op-ed, you present evidence. So that's where you go beyond anecdotes and you actually present some data that connects your life experience to something that is true. If you can do that, you can publish that op-ed, and I fully believe that someone will take it.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And for our listeners, everyone listening in right now, it's highly encouraged yet that you do so, because um, uh, your vapors, you have your own personal stories to share, and it's very important. I definitely encourage you, even if you just send it to us, we're always happy to share on our platform as well. So now, thank you again, Stephen, for reiterating that. um and that's another thing, right? So how misinformation can be spread, right? So, and especially on the social media, the approach on our side, the facts are on our side, right? So we need to be presenting more evidence-based um, information, so that it just showcases it's on our side. And that's but how we've actually also tried to tackle all the myths that are spread around. But yeah, definitely I think the strategy for social media is completely different, because how everything spreads there is completely different. But I wanted to also ask you about coverage. Let's say I write an op-ed myself, can be my personal story or whatever it is. Any advice how to get more attention for it, how to get published in different um, outlets as well?
Hmm. I would say that this connects to some stuff we've already gone over, but you have to think about the incentives of the media and what is actually good for them. This is where my job as a PR person and a media guy comes in handy. I don't think about the media as this thing where I'm trying to get them to do something good for me. Uh, that never works. If I'm relying on them to help me instead of me helping them, then we fail. We don't actually get a story placed. My job is to go, what is the media covering right now? What will drive clicks? What will create ad revenue, digital ad revenue for their articles that they publish that I can give them? And I should be able to think about incentives for them. I should be able to present to them an op-ed or a story that I can say, hey, this is actually like a big deal and a lot of people care about this. This is a pretty a serious story that you should cover. That's a completely different mindset than looking for a journalist to do you a favor. Think about yourself as being in service to others. And when you are in service of other people's priorities and goals, I think you'll find that things usually go better for you. So don't try to use media. Let them get something valuable from you. And that might take some research about what stories are actually trending. It might take some realism about when is the right time to publish your story, because there might be a wrong time for you to try to pitch a story relating to vaping advocacy. Um, and yeah, just be realistic and have a servant heart. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely. I can agree with you more there. It's not about someone doing you a favor, but also the aspect of it being like approaching it like fostering relationships as well. If you wanted to like look at, I would say another thing for me personally that I learned, or that was something I learned later on in my life, but it's a long-term relationship you want to step in, that don't just think about right now, like that's something completely different when you want to definitely foster a relationship, and comes back to the point that you mentioned in the beginning, appear as professionalism, right? So couldn't agree more with you there.
Yeah.
uh,
And that also connects a little bit to doing the research on the journalists that you pitch.
exactly.
Don't don't pitch the well, you could pitch the lifestyle. Don't pitch the like fashion industry journalist about your vaping protest. Make sure that you find the lifestyle reporter, the health reporter, or the vice reporter or something like that. Like a person who actually is on the beat relevant to you, because they do literally take offense, take insult when you pitch them a story that is not for them, because it demonstrates that you didn't research, and it demonstrates again that thing that I mentioned, that you don't really care about their incentives.
Mhm.
So do the research and know who you're pitching. Makes a big difference.
Yeah, you would appear much more professional if you've done your research beforehand as well. That's for sure. Um, do you have maybe any success stories that you want to share with our listeners as well? Like your own personal or in general during your career that you witnessed that are useful to share as well?
Hmm. There are a lot. I'm trying to think of the most relevant one to your audience. You know, an op-ed can change a person's life and open up a discussion that uh, sets you on a new path and really gets the country talking about something. I will never forget working for one of my clients. Is a young guy, barely like 20 years old, just moved to the United States from Venezuela to go to college here, and was just very interested in advocating against Venezuelan style socialism and warning people in the United States against those trends that he saw very presently in our politics. Wrote an op-ed, personal anecdote. It was basically titled like, "I'm from Venezuela," or "I grew up in Venezuela and escaped. Socialism is coming to the United States." That was sort of the hook of the article, which certain articles or certain outlets love that. And this got published in USA Today, which is the biggest paper in America. It's on the stands of every single hotel in this country. And that op-ed made it very quickly into the vein of the US Congress. Senators and congressmen were sharing that article and talking to one another about it. And then my client was being booked on CNN and Fox and all these other networks to talk about that story and make his case. Now that person is a internationally traveling public speaker, full-time writer, and a full-time advocate about the ideas that they care about. But they had to play by the rules of the media and understand what they were looking for. And this person was very good at that. So, that's one. And I can also think of several times where the United States, there's been discourse about smoking and different policies related to nicotine or cigarettes. The Biden administration here made a push to ban menthol cigarettes. Menthol cigarettes, mint flavored, is most popular with the African American population here. And at the same time, the United States is talking about race, equity, racism, institutional racism, and all this kind of stuff. The Biden administration over to the left is trying to ban Black Americans' preferred cigarette, which is a strange thing to do. And so, we were able to actually place an op-ed about that issue and make the claim, how is it not kind of racist to single out the tobacco product that is most enjoyed by Black Americans instead of going after all cigarettes, which I don't want to see them go after all cigarettes, but why did they pick this one? And that actually matters a whole lot, and that generated really good coverage in the US, a couple TV hits, but you have to go along with that angle and use it to your advantage as best you can.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely. I think we've heard a lot to keep in mind for sure. Any other advice that you wanted to share that we didn't cover, or anything else that comes to mind to definitely pay attention to when it comes to our approach as vapors, trying to get more media coverage about tobacco harm reduction?
Just be passionate. People are drawn to passion, commitment, truth. So just stay on it. Don't be discouraged, and always be ready to go after your first opportunity. When you get a window, an opportunity to speak about your issue and bring it into the discussion, do it. Don't stand back and miss your chance to swing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. I hope everyone, our listeners, enjoyed this talk. We've had this more in depth kind of um, session about this special media engagement at our WVA Academy. For those of you who don't know, WVA, we annually host academy sessions which cover a range of topics, whatever is important at that moment or general as well. Stephen was part of it as well. And thank you again for coming back to do this podcast again on this.
My
But
pleasure.
definitely. Thank you. But for our listeners, stay tuned. We will have Academy, as I mentioned, it's an annual thing for us. So we will have a repeat for it, and we'll cover similar or different or much very, very interesting topics again. So stay tuned if you want to get more involved in this. But for now, we can wrap up. Thank you again, Stephen, for being with us today. Thank you for all your expertise that you've shared with us. Good luck in your work. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to collaborate and work more together in the future again.
You as well, Lika. Thank you.